Sometimes silence speaks louder than any words ever could. But when a 6-year-old girl broke her 3-year vow of silence on live television, it wasn't her first word that shattered everyone in the studio. It was why she had chosen that moment, that man, that simple phrase to end years of self-imposed quiet. Canon O'Brien dropped his microphone, walked across the stage, and did something that broke every rule of late-night television. What happened next changed not just one family's life, but reminded millions that sometimes the most powerful moments happen when you stop talking and start listening. The Rodriguez family had traveled 2,000 miles from Phoenix to New York for their appearance on Late Night with Canon O'Brien. But this wasn't a typical family visit to a talk show. Carmen Rodriguez, 34, had written dozens of letters to producers explaining her daughter Maria's unique situation. For 3 years, since the age of 3, Maria had not spoken a single word. Not to doctors, not to teachers, not even to her mother. The specialist called it selective mutism, a complex anxiety disorder that trapped bright, capable children behind walls of silence. Maria Rodriguez sat in the green room that Tuesday afternoon, her small hands folded neatly in her lap. She wore a bright yellow dress with white flowers, chosen specifically because yellow was the only color that ever made her smile. Her dark hair was pulled back with a matching headband, and she carried a small notebook everywhere, using drawings and written words to communicate. At 6 years old, she could read at a 4th grade level and solve math problems that challenge kids twice her age. But she hadn't spoken since witnessing her father's sudden heart attack 3 years earlier. Canon O'Brien was in his element that evening. The show had started with his usual monologue, sharp wit cutting through current events with perfect timing. The audience was energetic, feeding off his natural charisma. Behind the scenes, producers had briefed Canon about the Rodriguez family situation. They'd planned a gentle segment, maybe some sign language, perhaps Maria would write something on her notepad for the camera, standard human interest content that would showcase Canon's softer side while respecting the child's boundaries. But television, like life, rarely goes according to plan. The segment began normally. Canon welcomed Carmen Rodriguez with his trademark warmth, asking about their journey from Arizona, their hopes for Maria's future. Carmen explained her daughter's condition with the practiced patience of a mother who had answered the same questions countless times. She spoke about Maria's intelligence, her artistic talent, her silent strength that inspired everyone who met her. Maria sat quietly in the guest chair next to her mother, her feet barely reaching the floor. The studio lights caught the gold flecks in her brown eyes as she observed everything with the intense focus that marked her personality. Canon had positioned himself at the perfect distance, not too close to overwhelm her, not so far as to seem disinterested. Maria draws the most beautiful pictures, Carmen was saying, holding up a sketch from her daughter's notebook. She communicates everything through her art. This one shows our house in Phoenix with the desert sunset behind it. Canon studied the drawing with genuine appreciation. The detail was remarkable for a 6-year-old. Carefully shaded cacti, purple mountains in the distance, a small house with smoke curling from the chimney. But what caught his attention was a figure standing in the yard, arms outstretched toward the sky. "That's beautiful, Maria," Canon said, directing his comment to the little girl rather than through her mother. "Who's that person in the yard?" It was a simple question, the kind hosts ask children dozens of times during family segments. The cameras were rolling, the audience was attentive, and the moment should have passed like hundreds of others. But something in Canon's tone, something in the way he looked directly at Maria instead of treating her as an object to be discussed, reached past 3 years of silence. Maria looked up from her notebook. For the first time since arriving at the studio, she made direct eye contact with Canon O'Brien. The camera operator, following standard protocol, zoomed in slightly to capture her expression. What they captured instead was the exact moment when 3 years of silence began to crack. Canon stopped mid-transition to his next question. Something in Maria's eyes, a flicker of recognition, of trust, of desperate need to be heard, made him pause completely. The studio audience sensed the shift in energy. Carmen stopped speaking mid-sentence, noticing her daughter's sudden change in posture. "Maria?" Canon said softly, setting down his index cards entirely. "Do you want to tell me about your picture?" The studio fell silent. Not the manufactured silence of a television pause, but the organic quiet that happens when 300 people simultaneously hold their breath. Maria continued to stare at Canon, her small hands gripping her notebook so tightly her knuckles had gone white. Behind the scenes, producers were frantically communicating through headsets. This wasn't scripted, this wasn't planned, but veteran crew members who had worked with Canon for years knew better than to interrupt when he was connecting with a guest, especially a child. Canon made a decision that defined everything that followed. He stood up from his desk, walked around to the guest area, and knelt down in front of Maria's chair. The camera operators adjusted their angles instinctively, capturing the moment when a late-night talk show host became something more profound. "You know what, Maria?" Canon said, his voice stripped of all performance, all entertainment value. "I think you have something important to say, and I think you've been waiting for the right person to say it to." Maria's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't look away. Her mother reached out instinctively, but Canon gently shook his head. This moment belonged to Maria. "Take your time," Canon continued, still kneeling. "Nobody's going anywhere. We've got all night if you need it." The silence stretched for what felt like minutes, but was probably less than 30 seconds. In television time, 30 seconds of dead air is an eternity. But Canon didn't move, didn't try to fill the space with jokes or transition to commercial. He simply waited, giving Maria the space she needed to find her voice. When Maria finally spoke, her voice was so quiet that the studio microphones barely picked it up. But in that silence, every word carried across the room like thunder. Canon Abi. 2 words, 2 simple words in a mixture of English and Spanish that hit the studio like a physical force. The audience gasped audibly. Carmen brought her hands to her mouth, tears streaming down her face. Canon's own eyes filled with tears as he realized the magnitude of what had just happened. "Did you just call me brother?" Canon asked, his voice thick with emotion. Maria nodded. And then, as if a dam had burst inside her, the words began to flow. "My papa went to heaven," she whispered. "I stopped talking because I thought if I was quiet enough, maybe he would come back. Maybe if I didn't use up all my words, I could save them for when he came home." The studio was completely silent now. Even the camera operators had stopped moving. Canon O'Brien, the man who had built a career on quick wit and perfect timing, found himself completely speechless. But Maria wasn't finished. "Mama cries at night when she thinks I'm sleeping," Maria continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. "She thinks it's her fault that I don't talk, but it's not. I thought maybe if I was really, really good and really, really quiet, God would give Papa back." Canon reached out slowly and took Maria's small hands in his. "Maria," he said, his professional composure completely gone. "Your papa wouldn't want you to save your words. He'd want you to use every single one of them. He'd want you to tell your mama how much you love her. He'd want you to tell your teachers your brilliant ideas. He'd want you to use your voice to make the world better." Maria looked at Canon with those wise old eyes that seemed too knowing for a 6-year-old. "How do you know?" "Because Geir," Canon said. And now he was speaking not just to Maria, but to every parent, every child, every person who had ever lost someone they loved. That's what people who love us always want. They want us to live. They want us to be happy. They want us to use all the gifts they helped us discover. What happened next was pure magic. Maria turned to her mother, and for the first time in 3 years, she spoke directly to Carmen. "Mama," she said, her voice clear and strong, "I love you, and I'm sorry I made you sad." Carmen slid off her chair and onto the floor, pulling Maria into her arms. They held each other while 300 people watched. This wasn't television anymore. This was a mother getting her daughter back. Canon stood up slowly, wiping his eyes. He looked at his producers, then at the audience, then back at Maria and Carmen. "Ladies and gentlemen, he said, his voice carrying gravity that transcended entertainment. "I think we just witnessed something miraculous." Not because Maria started talking, but because she reminded us that healing happens when people feel safe enough to be vulnerable. The studio erupted in applause that recognized something sacred. During the commercial break, Canon stayed with Maria and Carmen, sitting on the floor of his own set, looking through Maria's notebook while she explained each drawing. When they returned from commercial, Maria was a different child. She made eye contact with the cameras, and when Canon asked about her favorite subject in school, she answered confidently. "Math," she said with a shy smile, "and art, and reading about space because Papa used to say that when people go to heaven, they become stars." Canon spent the remaining minutes entirely focused on Maria. She told him she wanted to become a teacher to help other kids who felt scared. As the show wrapped up, Canon took off his signature lapel pin, a small gold microphone, and handed it to Maria. "This is for you to keep," he said, "to remind you that your voice matters." Maria took the pin with both hands. "Thank you, Canon Abi," she said, "for listening." The episode aired 2 weeks later and became the most watched episode in the show's history, not because of celebrity guests or viral moments, but because viewers witnessed something authentic in a world that often feels manufactured. They saw the moment when silence transformed into healing, when a child found her voice, and when a talk show host became a bridge between fear and courage. The impact extended far beyond that single night. Maria Rodriguez became a spokesperson for selective mutism awareness, traveling with her mother to schools and conferences, helping other silent children find their voices. Her artwork was featured in a children's book about grief and healing, with proceeds benefiting programs for kids with anxiety disorders. Canon O'Brien still keeps a drawing Maria sent him 6 months after the show. It depicts the late-night studio, but instead of an audience of strangers, it's filled with families holding hands. At the center, a small figure and a tall man stand together, surrounded by words floating in the air like butterflies. At the bottom, in Maria's careful handwriting, "Thank you for showing me that words are gifts, not weapons." 6 months ago, Canon received a children's book written by Maria titled "The Girl Who Saved Her Words." All proceeds benefit selective mutism research. In the dedication page, Maria wrote, "For Canon Abi, who showed me that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is kneel down and listen. And for Papa, who is watching from the stars and cheering every time I use my voice to help someone else find theirs." Carmen Rodriguez later said in interviews that the moment on Canon's show didn't just give her daughter back her voice, it gave their entire family permission to grieve openly, to heal together, to remember that love doesn't end with death but continues through the lives we touch and the stories we share. And Canon O'Brien learned something that changed how he approached every guest, every interview, every moment he spent in front of those cameras. Sometimes the most important conversations happen not when you're asking questions, but when you're creating space for answers that have been waiting years to be heard. But the story doesn't end with that single episode. What happened in the weeks that followed revealed the true power of that moment when silence became sound. 3 days after the episode aired, Canon received a hand-drawn card from Maria. The artwork showed children holding hands around a television. At the bottom, "You helped me remember that my voice is a gift." That visit 6 months later happened off camera. Canon and Maria spent an afternoon in Central Park where she told him about the support group she and her mother had started. 12 families had joined. "I tell them about you," Maria said. "Sometimes the person who helps us isn't a doctor. Sometimes it's just someone who sees us." The foundation that grew from Maria's support group now helps hundreds of families nationwide. The episode became a teaching tool in psychology programs. Canon's approach to his show evolved dramatically. He began incorporating more unscripted moments. The golden microphone pin became more than a keepsake. Maria wore it to her elementary school graduation, where she delivered the student address about using your voice to help others. She wore it to middle school, where she sought out quiet kids who sat alone. Today, when Canon interviews families or works with children on his show, He carries with him the lessons Maria taught him that Tuesday evening. He moves slower, listens deeper, and never forgets that behind every person's story is a journey that deserves respect, patience, and unconditional acceptance. The golden microphone pin still sits on Maria's bedroom dresser next to a photo of her father and a newer picture of her and Canon from that transformative night 6 years ago. But now it sits alongside dozens of letters from other children who have found their voices, inspired by a 6-year-old girl who chose courage over silence and a talk show host who chose humanity over entertainment. She's planning to study communications and child psychology in college, with dreams of developing new approaches to help trauma survivors heal through storytelling and creative expression. Her goal is simple but profound: to create more moments like the one she experienced with Canon, where scared children feel safe enough to step out of their protective silence and back into a world that's ready to listen. But perhaps the most profound legacy of that Tuesday evening wasn't captured in any award or recognition. It lived in the quiet moments that followed, in the ripple effects that spread far beyond television screens. Carmen Rodriguez often reflects on that life-changing moment. "Before the show, I felt like I was failing," she says. "Canon showed us that healing isn't about fixing someone. It's about creating space where they can heal themselves." The show received numerous awards for that episode, but Canon keeps only one on his desk, a plaque from Maria. It reads, "For the person who taught me that conversations happen when you stop trying to entertain and start trying to understand." The episode continues to be shared by families worldwide. Its impact lives in moments cameras never captured: a child speaking for the first time in months, a parent understanding their child's silence, because sometimes the most powerful words are indeed the ones we've been saving for the right moment, the right person, the right reason to break our silence and step back into the light. Sometimes all it takes is someone willing to kneel down, listen deeply, and create space where healing can begin.